Hello, this is Wade Frazier. This is May 12th, 2026, 11:30 a.m. I'm going to resume my series of posts on Wayne, also known as Mr. Professor in my writings. So when Wayne sent me $1,000 as a Merry Christmas present, that was about the end of my lifetime's happiest year. Yeah, from the time the voice in my head told me to move to Seattle till that Christmas gift from Wayne, that was my life's happiest year. I starved, but again the lightning bolt hit me, and I was really happy. And my lifetime's greatest hiking year, and that was a great year for me. Um, and then again, I raised my money there in January of '87. And then again, a former girlfriend who I once considered marrying. She was one of almost my smallest investor at $500, and she thought that her investment gave her license to attack me repeatedly, and she attacked me 4 times in 1 month on phone calls. And our last conversation left me in tears. And um, when I raised the money, I guaranteed everybody's investment. I mean, I was literally, and again, I wasn't going to take any for myself. And then I've written about this, talked about this, where once I gave 10% of what I had away, then more people started trying to invest, et cetera. And then that's when it got hairy. And again, when Wayne gave me that $1,000 Christmas present, I decided he would get stock instead, which was a momentous event. In fact, when Dennis, after my final phone call with that former girlfriend, Dennis, he said, pay her twice what she invested and get rid of her. You don't want somebody like her involved. And so I did. And back then, and then Dennis actually made a tape to all my other investors that says, okay, wage guarantee is going to be made good now. So here's the deal. You can get double your money back right now for your stock, or you can get all your money back for half your stock. And actually, one of my investors did take me up on that, and Wayne eagerly bought him out. Now, Wayne would have bought everybody out at that time. Um, and again, after our greatest energy show on Earth shows, we had several there. We weren't getting that much traction. And Dennis, being Dennis, he's looking for ways to survive. And so he decided to unveil a national regional concept in the United States. He divided the United States into 10 regions. So there'd be 10 regional dealers. And Wayne immediately became the regional dealer for the West Coast. And so, yeah, he wanted the West Coast, and Wayne actually began raising money. And so, yeah, he was the most eager and active regional dealer that Dennis had. In fact, Dennis actually went to the West Coast with Stan, call him Mr. Engineer Stan. The engineer had been with Dennis for years by that time. Um, Flew out to California. Actually, I think they met Wayne. He met Wayne on that trip. Um, and in those days, we got the $10 million offer to buy us out, which I learned a decade later was the first entreaty from the global elite. In fact, an Amway tycoon came by our office, Dexter Yeager, sniffing for opportunities. And Dennis also began getting encouraging phone calls, anonymous phone calls in the night, which I eventually learned were from a dissident faction of the global elite. So we were hearing from the white hat and black hat factions of the global elite. We were hearing from both of them there in Boston. And I've discussed a lot of this in the past. So I'm not going to belabor it. And then when I brought Mr. Mentor out to Boston, he was my biggest investor. I brought him out to Boston to assess our effort, which was Dennis crazy or not? And anyway, and Dennis quickly realized that I was not exaggerating about Mr. Mentor. He was a Tesla level inventive genius. And they apparently cut a secret deal without my knowledge or participation, which was my mentor said that if Dennis wanted to work with him, that they would have to move the operation to Ventura, in my hometown there in California. And the next thing I knew, we were planning a move to Ventura, my hometown, and they didn't tell me why. and at the time, I actually guessed until I read in Dennis's book. I guess the reason I moved there was because Wayne was raising money for the dealership, but that wasn't the reason. It was because of my mentor, which really cost me not knowing that. And then when we hit Ventura there, and I drove all our company assets out there in June of '87. Dennis showed up the next month after his father died there in Yakima. Dennis got to visit his father just before he died, and he brought the family down, and we started building the operation once again from scratch. And Dennis, Wayne just handed Dennis $40,000, and he said, "Here you go, get going." And when he did that, Dennis said, "Wait, you got any more friends like Wayne?" Yeah. So Dennis never had investors like Wayne or I. So we were not interested in controlling him or whatever. We were interested in just watching him go, give him the money and watch him go, help him out. He had never before or since he never had. I don't think he ever had investors before. He never had investors before like that. Um, and so we started going, and again, as I mentioned, Dennis hit on a national ad campaign, which skyrocketed there in August, September of '87. And Mr. Mentor came aboard. In fact, proposed marrying his engine with the panels from Dennis heat pump to do free energy. And next thing you know, we're going after it. We're going after free energy and also selling those kits on how to sell, build, and install the world's best heating system. So we were going places, but globally had different plans. And that secretiveness of not telling me why I moved to Ventura, that really cost me. And I avoid all secrecy in my work today. The only time I'm not telling stuff is to protect people. And I do that as little as I can. But there are people I have to protect their identities, et cetera, which I'm not protecting their identities too much because people get Dennis's book. They can almost all the names and the people I mention are in Dennis's books. They're easy to identify if people want to. So I'm not, there's not much that I'm holding back, let's say, on the identity front. But again, by April '87, my life's happiest year had long since ended, and my stress problems began. My drinking problems began again. So it was, yeah. So whoever sent me on this mission, they gave me a 1 year respite of happiness before the nightmare. So, and Wayne, he had adult onset on diabetes, and he injected himself with insulin every day. But he was an amazing physical specimen at age 52. And again, he was this great white hunter guy. So he grew up hunting and fishing. That's kind of America's pastime for rural youth, rural men. And so he had racks of antlers on his walls, a grizzly pelt that he shot in Alaska, all this kind of stuff. And at age 52, though, when we got there, so I was 29, just turned 29, Wayne was 52, and he invited me to play basketball with him. And so I did at the college where he taught. So we played on the outside course where I had played a decade earlier. So we played basketball, and I'm amazed that he could play basketball with me. So I was like, I couldn't dunk a basketball anymore, but I was still spry at 29. And Wayne actually could. He was competitive. I mean, I don't think he ever beat me, but he could be out there on the court running around with me, which I look back and I'm amazed because I quit playing basketball before I was 40 years old. And so anyway, yeah, an amazing physical specimen. And also, as the most beloved professor at the college, Wayne also had keys to the gymnasium. So that winter break, so this is again December of '87. During winter break, Wayne and I we played at the gym that I played at when I was in college. And so, in fact, we played. There was a guy from the Ventura, the Boston days, who came out. In fact, stayed with Wayne. This was the beginning of people staying at Wayne's house. Many did over the next few years, and we all played basketball together there. And this was another brief moment again, our business is skyrocketing. Um, yeah, and it was this brief moment of almost happiness. Um, I lived with that time. I moved out of Dennis's place in October because I found making money again. So I ended up again. My friends guided me. So the woman who I was her tenant, she's my wife today. And this again, this is all my otherworldly, all this otherworldly stuff that was going on. So again, I said my life, my free will seems quite to be limited to how I react to the things that my friends throw at me. Um, Yeah, so in fact, one thought I could have played for the Ventura College team. You know, I don't think so. But if I had pursued basketball rather than track, and golf, etc., I could have probably been a bench warmer on my high school team. And I maybe could have been a bench warmer on the college team. Maybe. I think Wayne was a little too generous in assessing my abilities, but I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I could have. In fact, there was at least one NBA player came through that program. Um, so when we hit Ventura with the money that Wayne gave us, we soon rented an office building which had a warehouse space in the back, which we soon turned into our R&D facility. And again, Dennis hit on the national marketing plan, explosive growth, and I was working 70-hour weeks again. So other than that Christmas break, I didn't see Wayne a whole lot during those months because I was working 70 hours a week. Um, and and then in early '88, so just a couple of weeks after, playing, having fun in the gymnasium, the raid hit, which began my life's worst year. And Wayne actually witnessed the sheriff's deputies making off with the documents they had stolen out of Mr. Researcher's office. And he wrote an affidavit about that. In fact, in Dennis's book, his affidavit can be seen. And Wayne testified also, I believe Wayne also testified to that. So I believe Wayne testified. I believe he testified at the preliminary hearing and the misconduct hearing, I believe. I'm not sure, but I think so. Wayne would have, so I think, yeah, I think they had him testify at those. And what happened in Ventura, so what happened in '88, what happened in '88 shook Wayne to his core. Again, he was this pillar of the community, most beloved professor, and he realized he was in a black hole of corruption there in Ventura County. Right down again within a mile or two of where he lived. Again, all this in incredible corruption. And again, Wayne and I were both oblivious to how corrupt it was in Ventura. Well, actually, he knew a little more than I did. I knew nothing of it. Wayne knew a little bit. So, for instance, he had a former student or something who actually knew that the oligarchy of Ventura County ran the drug trade. So Wayne eventually heard that, and he heard some other scuttlebutt of what was going on. Yeah, in fact, he actually had an inside connection to the local electric company. In fact, when he hit town, he actually, through his contact, he asked them, "So, what are you guys going to do?" And they were they were highly aware of us. And at that time, he was told that they hadn't decided what to do yet. And then again, later on, when I got my money, got the leading constitutionalist attorney, his connections told him that the CEO of the local electric company is ultimately the one who called a hit on our company. But he was doing it on behalf of the global elite. And all these corrupt officials were eager to do their bidding. So that's kind of the general framework I think of what happened. And Wayne saw it like I did, just like unbelievable, the corruption, the evil that we saw. Um, yeah, he would never see the world the same way after that year, just like I would. And then one evening, about a month or so after the raid, and again, my health only lasted about 6 weeks after the raid. Then I started going into a general physical collapse from stress. In fact, one of my brothers worked there for us for a little while, and years later, he told me that I looked like a raccoon in those days with dark circles under my eyes and stuff. That's not a surprise. And in fact, one evening, Wayne came to the office to help me organize that evening. So I literally in the daytime would be just sheer chaos, and in the evening I'd try to put my desk back together because they stripped my office to the walls. Everything was taken from my office in the raid, so I was operating with no records. And the chaos was so great that I would spend hours into each day organizing my desk for all the tasks for the next day. And in a couple hours, my desk was just a pile of chaos again. This was what life was like in the midst of all that pandemonium. As Dennis was scrambling to survive the next death blow. And we never talked about it, but I'm sure he was quite impressed and shocked to see what I was going through. And around that time, actually, Wayne, in fact, literally, this was in probably, or I think it was early March of that year. I remember March of '88. I had been together with my woman who became my wife for a few weeks at that time, and Wayne took me out for an idyllic weekend on Santa Cruz Island. Again, I put company post links to all this so people could see, and that was where Wayne, again, being the Great White Hunter, Santa Cruz Island is the biggest of the Channel Islands, and in those days, 10%. So the western tip of it was a hunting preserve where people would come and hunt sheep and pigs, wild sheep and pigs. And so, in fact, anyway, we went out there in a helicopter. We flew out a helicopter from the Oxnard Airport. In fact, we saw gray whales migrating with dolphins coming after them, and a whale watching boat behind them and stuff. And it was in March. The Santa Cruz Island looked like Ireland. It was green, lush. It was a really amazing weekend. I hiked around the island. And yeah, we walked when the helicopter set us down, and there was a sign that said "Hunt Med." Yeah, so it was basically this hunting resort, if you will. And it was a good weekend. That was good, and I had these brief little interludes in the nightmare. But again, my health started failing though around that time, and I asked Dennis for the summer off to try to recover. From the stress. I was shaking from the stress. Within 3 months after the raid, I was wrecked. And that was around the same time that Dennis got the $1 billion offer from the CIA to fold their operation, which I didn't learn about till I read it in his book. Again, I just thought things Dennis would do, I wouldn't learn about him until I read them in his book. And a few weeks after rejecting the CIA's offer, Dennis was arrested with the $1 million bail. And then my nightmare truly began. And reading Dennis's book can give people some hints of what I was living through in those days. And the corruption was hard to believe. At first, again, the corruption was bigger than the imagination. So after arresting Dennis for all the gangster officials and stuff, it was promotions and awards and all this kind of stuff. And this is how it works. And this is people who get their hands bloody and stuff, they all get promoted. In evil systems, evil-minded people are very successful. Ventura County is a sterling example of that. And as I was told, soon after Dennis was arrested, Ventura County had the reputation of being the most corrupt county in the United States, which I didn't know. They didn't tell me that growing up. Yeah, the local newspaper is part of it, so they're not going to tell anybody about it. So found out the hard way. And then Wayne actually soon took in Dennis's wife and children. And in fact, they were going to try to move them to one of Dennis's dealers in Kentucky was going to take him in. And I helped Wayne pack up their van. They were going to take it across the United States. And then Wayne's van overheated in the 110-degree temperatures of the California desert and had to return. And they never went. In fact, and that guy in Kentucky soon betrayed the effort. So it worked out, I would guess. So yeah, Wayne's wife and children lived with him and his wife for more than a year. In fact, Wayne and I are like uncles to Dennis's children. And Wayne's home became like a halfway house for Dennis's inmates. He was quite a parade of people came to Wayne's home over the next few years, and it put on a strain. Put a strain on his marriage, understandably, and my life was coming apart in ways that again I can't publicly discuss how my life was coming apart, but people will read Dennis's books and they'll get an idea. Stan, the Mr. Engineer, he lived with us for 6 months there in Boston. And again, I've written about this, so I'm not going to. The short version is, when he went to work for Ken Hodgel, who was this Mormon, again, provocateur, kind of like Bill Delp in Seattle, the inside guys. And Hodgel, he had led the theft of our company when Dennis got arrested. and another Mormon, just like the Mormons in Seattle. And then a generation later, I heard Stephen Greer say the Mormon financial empire was a ringleader of the global elite. It was one of those interesting, isn't that interesting moments in my lifetime. Yeah, so all of a sudden, the theft of our Ventura and Seattle companies made a lot more sense once I had heard that. Um, Stan later, in fact, Stan stayed at Wayne's home with us actually after I married my wife. And soon before Stan died, he told Mr. Researcher, who also signed up with Hodjo, that they were a couple. They were the world's saps. They were just suckers. And Stan admitted that. And Stan died like a month or two later. But I got to give credit for Stan for admitting that, what saps they were to do something like that. But Stan actually provided key testimony at the misconduct hearing, which is what ended up getting the fraud charges dismissed against Dennis. One of Dennis's salesmen was a minister with a physics degree, and he helped. In fact, when I showed up at this surreal moment when Stan told me he was going to go work for Hodja with Mr. Researcher, which I didn't believe at first. There was one of Dennis's salesmen actually had a physics degree, and the guy was a minister. And he actually testified on Dennis's behalf of the preliminary hearing, and he was helping Dennis's wife try to get the company to a billionaire in Colorado at the same time. That's when the guy showed up in town. All this stuff happened in a couple of days, and our employees stole everything they could, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I've read about this. Yeah, unbelievable nightmare. And other than him, Wayne and I were the only people who stood up for Dennis and Ventura. Everybody else ran and hid, or they helped the prosecution out, or stole everything they could. This kind of. So yeah, there was only a couple of us standing up against the forces of darkness. And again, my day on the witness stand was a turning point in my life, and the next month was the blackest month of my life. But I got over it, and I decided I would do whatever I could to save Dennis's life. And in fact, Dennis was by that time writing his first book from his cell, from solitary confinement. Yeah, he got thrown into solitary confinement at Christmas time for trying to throw a Christmas party for his inmates, as if Mr. Deputy and friends were these snidely whiplash parodies of evil. Yeah, it was really over the top. And Dennis was writing that he probably wouldn't live to see the side of the bars again. And so that next month, I asked after work one day, because I was working at the medical lab in Los Angeles, digging out of my financial abyss. I went bankrupt and all this kind of fun back then. And but I went to Wayne's house and asked Dennis's wife what I could do, and she handed me Gary Ween's book. And about a week later, I met Gary. A week or two later, I met Gary, and his advice was critical for what happened next. I approached Wayne because Gary told me nobody would help, and my strategy was to get extra witnesses on the witness stand who could beat the fraud charges, which is in fact what did happen. So my strategy was actually it worked, but I approached Wayne to get him to loan money for a legal fund for Dennis. I asked Wayne to mortgage his house and loan me $50,000 for Dennis's legal fund, which was twice my annual salary. And yeah, I knew I was signing my life away. But 6 weeks later, Dennis was out of jail, and the greatest miracle I ever witnessed, which we all knew it was divine intervention. Yeah, there's no way. It was a miracle that happened. Dennis was out of jail. When I saw Dennis last year, he actually told me that he and his wife baited Mr. Deputy into opening Dennis's legal mail. And it was the second time they did it. They already did it once before, which is illegal. And the judge reprimanded him the first time. Well, the second time, that was the big reason why Dennis got released on his own recognizance, because they couldn't keep from violating Dennis's rights while he was in jail. But I didn't let it. It was just Wayne, my girlfriend, my future wife, Wayne, his wife. Actually, a couple other people knew, but basically, I didn't let Dennis know that I was his mysterious benefactor when he got out of jail. And literally a few days after Dennis got out of jail, he called a meeting basically with Wayne and me and Wayne in Wayne's kitchen to let's get going again. And I told Dennis I was done. I said, that ride was too rough for me, and I'm digging out of my abyss now. I'm trying to put back together the pieces of my shattered life. I'm not going to get involved again. And Wayne and Dennis wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept working on me for the next 8 years to get me to go back to work for him, which I eventually did. Uh, and that will come later. Actually, I have written about this, talked about this. And I didn't openly discourage Wayne. So it's a thing where I couldn't discourage him from getting involved with Dennis, but I definitely made it clear what my stance was. And I had hoped it would influence him into not going all in with trying to rebuild this thing in the shadow of the gangsters in Ventura County. Yeah, Dennis couldn't even leave the city of Ventura without getting permission, etc. So you're trying to rebuild this whole thing right under their thumb. But Wayne did, and he went all in, and it bankrupted him. Yeah, he got bankrupt within a couple of years. He was bankrupt doing that, and then again, once Dennis walked out of jail, I knew he'd be okay. Dennis was so resourceful, I knew he'd be okay. And again, my legal fund brought in the USA's foremost constitutional attorney, and eventually had a prosecutorial misconduct hearing. So that was something to have a misconduct hearing. Um, yeah, one of the few that have ever been held probably in Ventura County. And Mr. Deputy actually, for his part, hid in his home for months to avoid testifying. It was almost fun for a while. And then Mr. Researcher eventually came out of hiding and testified at the misconduct hearing about the crimes of the deputies, on how he watched them ransacking his office and photographing the blueprints and stealing everything out of his office, and then how he was threatened by Mr. Deputy. So, but in the end, too much political pressure is being brought to bear on the police. So the global elites greased palms to make this happen. And so they had to make it happen. And so anyway, in the end, the judge took Dennis's attorney hostage to force Dennis to plead guilty to not filing a form. Yeah, so Dennis's crime that he pled guilty to was not filing a form, except he had appeal rights to the U.S. Supreme Court to say not filing a form shouldn't be a felony. It shouldn't merit prison time. But Dennis spent years behind bars, and then the prison officials repeatedly tried to get Dennis murdered by the inmates. And it nearly worked. So Dennis got lucky and only had some fingers broken and teeth knocked out. And I eventually learned that was standard practice in California, that people who are railroaded politically would be murdered behind bars by the officials and stuff. In fact, I heard it called something like execution by inmate or death by an inmate or something. But in California, it's pretty normal to get people out of the way, to kangaroo them into prison, and then get them murdered by the inmates. Yeah, this was standard practice in California. Good old California. In fact, Wayne had an adopted son, and he was sent to prison in those same years. In fact, seemingly in retribution, because Wayne stood up to them. In fact, this is the main reason why Wayne did not want me to mention his whole name publicly. Except his son is now dead. He died at age 55 here a couple of years ago. And this is one of the reasons why I feel I can just at least say Wayne. And some other people have to die before I'll be totally revealing Wayne's identity. Although again, it's Dennis's book, but for my part, I don't identify him. But Wayne died in 2002. So there's not much. The reasons for Wayne wanting to be anonymous are not there's not that risk any longer. And I'm skipping over quite a few heartbreaking events from those days. Yeah, it was Wayne and I were put to the ringer in unbelievable ways in those years. In fact, when Wayne was trying to rebuild the business, he got involved with an alternative diabetes treatment and even used himself as a human guinea pig, which actually harmed his health, which I wish he hadn't done that. But anyway, so then again, when it was, I got married and I moved to Ohio to put my wife through grad school there in 1990. In fact, a few weeks after we got married is when Dennis got looked into that and pleading guilty for not filing a form. And the day after we got married, actually, we moved into Wayne's home. So we lived with Wayne. We were part of many people who lived in Wayne's home there. And Wayne actually, some of Dennis's inmates Wayne's house became a halfway home for inmates, and there was quite a parade of people coming through Wayne's house in those days. But soon after we moved to Ohio, Wayne's health began failing. And the venture with Dennis didn't succeed. In fact, in Dennis's typical humor, the effort that Wayne funded, Dennis called it resurrection marketing. Yeah, that's Dennis. And so, and Wayne was a strong, silent type, this taciturn, Midwestern farmer. But one day on the phone, he admitted to me that the stress of the ordeal is what likely contributed to his failing health. And so, about a year after we left, Wayne got gangrene in his legs. In fact, he went to a so-called alternative diabetes doctor who had diabetes himself, and he pronounced the fate that Wayne had gangrene, and he'd have his legs amputated one day soon, but they could give him some drugs that might slow the process. So Wayne went from a millionaire and strapping physical specimen in 1987 to bankruptcy and going to lose his legs 4 years later. It was devastating for me to witness that. Super devastating for me. Now, fortunately, Wayne's wife actually was hip to alternative medicine because of her own health issues. She had a strong allergic reaction to chemicals and stuff. And anyway, and because of her own health issues, which Orthodox medicine could do nothing for, she started exploring alternatives. She was pretty hip. She was pretty hip. What we saw in the energy racket, she saw in the medical racket, which I've written about plenty. And once the doctor pronounced his doom on Wayne's legs, Wayne's wife said, "We're going to go to Mexico." And so they went down to Mexico with the treatment, which is banned in the United States, and it completely reversed the gangrene in his legs. Impossibly. In fact, when the doctor saw Wayne's legs a few weeks later, it totally blew him away. In fact, he thought he was witnessing the impossible, some kind of miracle. And then they asked Wayne, "What in God's name happened?" Wayne said, "Well, I went down to Mexico. Who's in the dark said I heard Mexico." He went Mexico and he shrieked, kind of held his hands. His hands ran out of the room and didn't come back because doctors in California are taught that all that happens in Mexico is voodoo. This guy witnessed the reversal of a supposedly impossible, irreversible condition. He saw it get reversed. And when he heard it happen in Mexico, freaked him out, and he shrieked running out of the room. In fact, at Wayne's funeral a decade later, his widow told me that if she had not taken Wayne to Mexico, Wayne's last decade of Wayne's life would have been spent in a wheelchair. So there was that. Wayne was able to homestead his house and save some of the equity he had left in it, but he lost almost everything. And he moved his family back. He and his wife moved back to the family farm in North Dakota in 92 or 93, 1992 or 1993, one of those years. And then, and that's it for this post. What comes next? So my next post will be my last post about my beloved Wayne. And it might be the most unbelievable part of my story with Wayne. So anyway, so that comes next. So that's all for today.